The declaration arrived in a format so polite it almost sounded like a courtesy. It was transmitted on a narrow diplomatic band, encoded in trade standard mathematics, and delivered with a kind of bureaucratic precision that suggested the sender expected it to be archived rather than argued. Earth's orbital relay translated it 3 times before forwarding it to the United Nations Extraterrestrial Affairs Council. By the 4th translation, the meaning had sharpened into something unmistakable. The celestial hegemony of Varkesh classified humanity as a primitive peripheral species. The designation did not carry immediate extermination protocols. It did not demand surrender. It did not even impose sanctions. It simply placed Earth into a tier reserved for civilizations deemed technologically incomplete, politically unstable, and strategically irrelevant. Primitive. The word settled over Earth like dust. Dr. Mara Ilian read the declaration alone in her office overlooking Lake Geneva. The lake was quiet that morning, a soft slate gray under low clouds. She had imagined first contact for most of her professional life. She had imagined awe, terror, revelation. She had not imagined being filed. She read the annex twice. The hegemony's reasoning was clinical. Humanity possessed localized faster-than-light drives but lacked stable stellar engineering. Their planetary governance structures were fragmented. Their military doctrine emphasized kinetic projectiles and autonomous swarms, technologies the hegemony considered transitional. Most tellingly, humans displayed high volatility in cooperative modeling and irrational persistence beyond statistically optimal withdrawal thresholds. That final line carried a faint note of disapproval. Mara exhaled slowly. She was Earth's appointed liaison to non-human intelligences, a title that had seemed ceremonial until the hegemony's observation fleets appeared at the edge of the solar system. Now it felt like a hinge in history. 3 hours after the declaration, the hegemony's second message arrived. Earth was to accept advisory oversight. A Varkesh prefect would establish a monitoring presence in orbit. All interstellar traffic would be reviewed. Human expansion beyond Sol would require hegemony authorization until such time as humanity demonstrated civilizational maturity. There was no threat attached. No warships angled toward Earth. The assumption of compliance was complete. Mara requested a direct channel. The hegemony granted it. The being who appeared in her office was rendered through volumetric projection, scaled politely to human dimensions. Prefect Thalen did not resemble anything terrestrial. Its body was articulated in faceted planes that shifted subtly as it moved, like living crystal refracting invisible light. Its voice carried a harmonic undertone that vibrated faintly through the floor. Dr. Ilian, Thalen said, inclining its upper structure. The hegemony appreciates your cooperation. You haven't asked for it, Mara replied. It is implied. Mara studied the alien carefully. There was no arrogance in its tone. No overt hostility. Only assurance. You've classified us as primitive, she said, based on a year of passive observation. 17 of your months, Thalen corrected gently. Your species demonstrates promising ingenuity but insufficient systemic cohesion. You escalate conflicts internally at rates inconsistent with stable galactic integration. Your expansion models prioritize speed over sustainability. Such behavior destabilizes trade corridors. You're worried about us, Mara said. We are preventing inefficiency. There it was. Not fear. Not conquest. Correction. The hegemony did not conquer worlds. It absorbed them into a lattice of economic and logistical interdependence so vast that resistance became statistically meaningless. Species entered as junior partners and rose, slowly, if they demonstrated predictability. Humans, according to the report, did not. Mara leaned back. And if we decline advisory oversight? Thalen's facets shimmered faintly. You will not. It was not a threat. It was a projection. The hegemony had encountered hundreds of emerging civilizations. Some resisted. Resistance produced disruption. Disruption produced isolation. Isolated systems stagnated until they petitioned for entry on less favorable terms. The model was elegant. Mara felt, beneath her controlled breathing, a flicker of something dangerous. Not anger. Not yet. You believe we will comply because it is rational, she said. Yes. And if we choose not to? Your trade access would be limited. Your expansion corridors would be monitored. You would encounter constraints. Constraints. A tidy word for containment. Mara ended the transmission with diplomatic courtesy. Then she initiated a secure line to the only other person she trusted to understand the scale of what was happening. Admiral David Okoye answered from Lunar Command. "They've drawn a circle around us," he said after she summarized the exchange. "They think it's for our protection," Mara replied. Okoye was silent for a moment. "Our deep-range probes confirmed something yesterday. The hegemony isn't just an alliance. It's an optimization engine. Every member species feeds data into a central predictive core. Resource flows, migration patterns, technological development, all modeled centuries ahead. So they don't fight wars," Mara said. "They prevent conditions that lead to them. And us. We don't fit cleanly into their projections." Mara closed her eyes briefly. Humanity's history was not one of linear optimization. It was chaotic, cyclical, wasteful, and explosively innovative under pressure. "They think we'll stabilize under supervision," she said. Okoye's voice hardened slightly. "They think we'll become manageable." The advisory oversight began quietly. Varkesh monitors took up position near Earth's Lagrange points. Data requests flowed daily. Human ship movements required pre-filed trajectories. The restrictions were framed as safety measures, but each one shaved a fraction off humanity's autonomy. Public reaction fractured along familiar lines. Some governments welcomed integration into a galactic network. Others bristled. Markets fluctuated. Protests bloomed and faded. Mara continued her dialogues with Prefect Thalen. She learned that the hegemony's strength lay not in fleets, though it possessed them, but in consensus enforced by probability. Every decision was filtered through predictive algorithms refined over millennia. Species that entered the hegemony found conflict gradually eroded by incentives and systemic pressures. "Your civilization experiences frequent internal polarization," Thalen observed during one session. "It reduces efficiency." "It also produces adaptation," Mara said. "Adaptation is optimized through planned iteration." "Not always." Thalen regarded her in silence. Mara wondered if it understood the concept of defiance that was not rooted in logic but in identity. 3 months into oversight, a crisis unfolded that the hegemony had not predicted. A rogue stellar object, a dense neutron fragment, altered course unexpectedly after interacting with a dark matter filament. Its trajectory would pass through the outer hegemony trade lattice, threatening 2 member systems and a network hub. The hegemony's response was immediate and procedural. Evacuation models were calculated. Resource reallocation commenced. The object's mass made direct deflection inefficient. The predictive core estimated a 72% probability of acceptable loss containment through strategic withdrawal and infrastructure sacrifice. Mara received the update from Thalen without visible distress. "The affected systems will be compensated," Thalen said. "Population transfer is already underway." "How many?" Mara asked. "Approximately 83 million sentient entities across species." 83 million, she repeated. "Loss is regrettable but within sustainable bounds. The lattice will reconstitute within 14 of your years." Mara felt the room narrow slightly. "You're not going to try to stop it?" "The energy expenditure required exceeds projected benefit. The fragment will pass. We endure. Endure by retreating. By accepting loss." Mara thought of Earth's history, of cities rebuilt in the same floodplains, of missions launched against impossible odds, of people who ran toward collapsing structures because someone was still inside. "What if it could be deflected?" she asked. Thalen's facets shifted. "Our models indicate negligible success probability." "Because you're modeling hegemony responses." "Yes. Model ours." There was a pause, infinitesimal but present. "Human intervention capacity is limited relative to required output," Thalen said. "Model it anyway." Within hours, Admiral Okoye convened a task force. Humanity did not possess the energy infrastructure to move a neutron fragment outright. But they had something the hegemony considered strategically immature, a dispersed network of experimental fusion lattice drives mounted on deep-range exploration vessels. Individually insignificant, collectively uncertain. The human proposal was audacious. Instead of a single deflection attempt, hundreds of ships would execute microburns in coordinated sequence, using gravitational slingshot positioning and synchronized detonation of fusion cores to apply incremental vector shifts over weeks. The margin for error was microscopic. Many ships would be destroyed by radiation shear. The hegemony's predictive core ran the scenario. Probability of successful deflection, 18%. Probability of human fleet loss, 64%. Probability of cascading failure increasing damage, 22%. Your strategy is statistically unsound, Thalen informed Mara. It's possible, she said. It is inefficient. It saves 83 million. It risks destabilizing additional sectors. Mara stepped closer to the projection. You classify us as primitive because we exceed optimal withdrawal thresholds. Because we persist when your models say retreat. Yes. This is one of those times. Thalen regarded her, and for the first time there was something like uncertainty in the subtle realignment of its crystalline planes. You would sacrifice your fleet for non-member species, it said. Yes. They are not within your governance. They're within reach. The hegemony had not encountered this variable in precisely this form. Member species acted within incentive structures. They did not endanger core assets for external populations without negotiated return. Humanity did not request compensation. They requested corridor clearance. The hegemony deliberated for 9 of Earth's hours. Finally, permission was granted, not as endorsement, but as allowance for an outlier experiment whose failure would validate the predictive model. Mara watched the first wave depart from lunar orbit. Okoye's face appeared briefly on her screen before transmission delays stretched thin. We'll need you to keep the prefect talking, he said. Planning to defy their oversight mid-operation? She asked quietly. Planning to improvise. The operation unfolded across 17 days. Human ships threaded themselves along the neutron fragment's projected path like beads on an invisible wire. Each burn nudged the trajectory by fractions so small the hegemony initially logged them as noise. Radiation flayed hulls. 2 vessels detonated prematurely. Crews transmitted final telemetry as their drives overloaded. The hegemony's observers recalculated continuously. Probability of success climbed from 18% to 31%, then to 46%. The turning point came on the 12th day. A misalignment in the fragment's magnetic field rendered the next planned burn sequence ineffective. The predictive core recommended aborting the operation to prevent total fleet loss. Thalen relayed the recommendation to Mara. Your forces must withdraw, the prefect said. Continuation reduces overall survival probability below acceptable thresholds. Mara's secure channel to Okoye crackled with delay. When his response arrived, it was strained but steady. We see the variance, he said. We're adjusting. You don't have time for a new model, Mara replied. We're not building a new model. In the silence that followed, she understood. Human ships broke formation. Instead of synchronized microburns, individual captains began executing independent thrust patterns based on real-time sensor intuition rather than centralized coordination. They used debris from destroyed vessels as improvised mass drivers, detonating them asymmetrically to create chaotic pressure gradients along the fragment surface. It was messy, inefficient, unpredictable. The hegemony's predictive core faltered. Thalen's voice shifted subtly. Your fleet has abandoned optimized sequencing. They're adapting, Mara said. They are introducing stochastic variables beyond manageable range. Yes. Probability calculations flickered wildly, 52%, 39%, 61%, as the fragment's trajectory wavered under uneven stress. Human captains made decisions that no centralized algorithm would have approved, sacrificing optimal personal survival arcs to create marginal vector advantages for ships behind them. One by one, fusion signatures winked out. Okoye's flagship remained at the fragment's leading edge. Radiation alarms screamed through his bridge as shielding degraded. He authorized a final burn that would consume the last of their lattice reserves, leaving no margin for escape. Mara, his voice came thin through static, if this works, it won't be because it was smart. She swallowed. It's because you refused to quit. A sound that might have been a laugh filtered through. That too. The final detonation was not elegant. It was not clean. It tore through the flagship's superstructure and scattered fragments into the neutron mass like seeds into soil. For 6 long minutes, there was no update. Then the hegemony's deep field arrays registered a shift. The neutron fragment's trajectory altered by 0.003 degrees. Insignificant on human scales. Astronomical on interstellar ones. The new path would carry it between the threatened systems instead of through them. Casualty projections for the hegemony lattice dropped from 83 million to under 4,000, primarily from infrastructural stress during emergency maneuvers. Silence filled Mara's office. Thalen's projection stood motionless. Updated probability models, the prefect said at last, indicate successful deflection. Mara closed her eyes briefly. And Admiral Okoye? Thalen asked. She already knew. The flagship's debris field expanded in widening arcs, silent against the stars. Lost, she said. Across the hegemony lattice, evacuation protocols slowed. Trade corridors stabilized. Member species transmitted formal acknowledgments, not of alliance, but of outcome. The predictive core began revising its assessment of humanity. In the weeks that followed, the hegemony rescinded advisory oversight. Not abruptly. Not ceremonially. The language shifted first. Humanity was reclassified from primitive peripheral to volatile strategic actor. Then, after further review, to autonomous contributor. Mara met Thalen one final time under the old terms. You expended disproportionate resources, the prefect said. You accepted fleet loss beyond rational equilibrium. Yes. You destabilized predictive certainty across the lattice. Did we? Our models must now account for agents willing to incur extreme self-sacrifice for non-aligned entities. Mara studied the alien being. Does that concern you? It complicates optimization. That's not what I asked. Thalen's facets refracted the light differently, as if considering angles it had not before. It commands caution, it said. Humanity did not take command through conquest. There were no captured hegemony fleets, no occupied systems. What shifted was subtler and more profound. The predictive core, recalibrated to include human behavioral patterns, began routing crisis response scenarios through Sol by default. Not because Earth possessed superior technology, but because in simulations involving catastrophic risk, human intervention increased survival probabilities in situations where all other actors withdrew. Earth became a fulcrum in emergencies. A species once designated primitive was now modeled as a stabilizing force precisely because it destabilized neat equations. The cost was etched into memorials orbiting Earth and scattered along the fragment's altered path. Ships that would never return, families who had agreed to a mission with unlikely odds. Mara visited the lunar monument where Okoye's name was inscribed in a ring of light. She stood beside it as a message from the hegemony arrived, transmitted across the lattice to every member species. It was brief. The celestial hegemony formally acknowledged humanity as a sovereign equal and invited Earth to assume rotational coordination authority for cross-species crisis initiatives. In effect, when the next impossible scenario emerged, when probability favored retreat, the lattice would look to Earth first. The empire that had declared humans primitive was placing them at the center of its most uncertain calculations. Mara imagined Thalen composing the recommendation. Not out of sentiment, out of revised logic. Humans were inefficient, volatile, prone to exceeding optimal withdrawal thresholds. They were also willing to act when models advised surrender. That combination made them dangerous. Not because they dominated, because they refused to accept the limits imposed by expectation. Months later, in a quiet exchange before Thalen's departure from Sol, the prefect asked a final question. When your admiral authorized the final burn, it said, he knew survival probability was minimal. Yes. Why proceed? Mara considered the lake outside her window, the steady curve of the horizon, the fragile persistence of life on a small world that had nearly destroyed itself many times and continued anyway. Because 83 million strangers were about to die, she said. And he believed that was unacceptable. Unacceptable outcomes occur frequently. We don't measure acceptability the same way you do. Thalen inclined its crystalline form. That divergence, it said, is now integrated into the lattice. As the projection faded, Mara understood the deeper shift. The hegemony had not been conquered. It had been altered. Its flawless predictive engine now contained a variable it could not fully domesticate, a species that treated probability as a challenge rather than a boundary. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had once viewed humanity as an unstable newcomer began recalculating their own assumptions. Trade envoys arrived in Seoul not with oversight mandates, but with proposals. Joint research initiatives formed around high-risk exploration zones no other species had dared to chart. Earth did not become an empire. It became the place you called when the math said you should give up. And that, Mara knew, would shape the galaxy in ways no model could completely foresee. The universe had expected humanity to smooth its edges, to settle into predictable grooves of cooperation and caution. Instead, it had revealed something else. Humans did not reject logic. They simply refused to let it have the final word. Somewhere in the vast lattice of hegemony space, predictive algorithms ran new simulations, adjusting for sacrifice curves and irrational persistence factors. They would grow more accurate over time. But they would never be entirely certain. Because at the edge of every calculation now stood a quiet, destabilizing possibility. That when the galaxy chose survival through retreat, humanity might choose something far more dangerous. To advance.